Right. Hello, Year 10. Last lesson we looked at sound waves and we got to about here, which is essentially the range of human hearing. And today, what we're going to do is there's quite a lot of independent work today. You're going to try and understand how it is we are able to hear. So, obviously, we hear through our ears, and I'm going to talk you through the main structures of the ear. And then there's a couple of documentaries for you to watch. They're short ones on YouTube. And then I'm going to ask you to essentially explain the process of how we hear through essentially a storyboard or comic strip, but obviously scientifically labeled. So, so far we have learnt about the range of human hearing. This is the essential diagram of an ear that you'll be familiar with. And you'll see lots of different parts to this, okay? But what we're going to focus on is how we are actually able to hear. So we've got all the different parts of the ear here. Okay, I'm going to talk you through how they work. So the part that you're essentially familiar with is probably the outer ear. This is called the pinna. Okay, now you don't really need to know too much about that, except it's made of collagen. It's essentially like a radar dish, and if you physically move your ear or point towards a sound, you actually receive a better signal, okay, clearer sound, and you can sort of quickly try that now. We are also, you probably familiar with this part, the outer ear. This is called the ear canal. So what happens is the pinna will sort of funnel sound, it's like a trumpet, will funnel sound into our outer ear canal. Okay, so you've got the pinna and you've got the outer ear canal, and sound will basically be funneled down to here until it reaches this flap of skin here. Okay, this is called the eardrum. And remember that sound waves are vibrations, okay? They're oscillations, back and forth movements, in this case of air particles. And so what that does is it causes the eardrum to oscillate back and forth like this. Then attached to the eardrum are one, two, three bones, which collectively are known as ossicles. However, they do have individual names. First one is the hammer, the anvil, and then the stirrup. Okay, and what they do is they essentially, as this vibrates back and forth, these are all connected and they start to essentially move backwards and forwards. And they're actually tiny bones. They're the smallest bones in your body, and they are about the size of a grain of rice. And what happens is, as they start to vibrate, they bash, bash, bash into this structure here. Now, it looks a bit like a snail. Um, this is called the cochlea. Now, the cochlea is filled with a liquid. And what happens is, as the stirrup bashes into the cochlea, the liquid then starts to vibrate in there. And I can't really show you on here, so you'll need to look at this from the video. But inside the cochlea, the outer edge of the cochlea is lined with millions of tiny little hairs. Okay, and each of these sets of hairs respond to certain frequencies. So there are hairs that will respond to low frequencies, and there are hairs that respond to high frequencies. And what happens is those will vibrate, and they're each attached to a nerve, and then if they're stimulated, it sends a signal down the nerve off into the brain, and the brain will interpret that as sound along the auditory nerve. A couple other little structures I haven't pointed out. These at the top are called the semicircular canals. Now they're attached to the cochlea, but they have actually nothing to do with hearing. They are to do with balance. Essentially, they work a bit like a spirit level. If you are moving around in 3 dimensions, essentially the liquid inside them sloshes around, and it tells you whether or not you are upright, if you're moving, whatever. So it gives you sensation of if you're moving and in which direction. So often people who have inner ear infections often feel quite dizzy and ultimately quite sick. And this is also what causes seasickness, because what's happening, although your eyes tell you that you're moving, it doesn't marry up with what this part of your ear is actually telling you. This tells you that you're moving from side to side, say on a ship. But your eyes will tell you that you're not moving, and so your brain doesn't know how to marry up those two signals and will start to make you feel quite unwell. The other thing you've got here is a tube which runs from your sinuses into your inner ear. Okay, so this part is all called the inner ear, this side of the eardrum, and this part is all the outer ear. And what this will do is this tube, you can force air into this section here, so the pressure on this side is equal to the pressure on this side of the eardrum. Now, this is very useful if you go deep swimming, or if you go up in an airplane, you'll realize there's a pressure difference. Okay, so what you do is you hold your nose and blow, and it essentially forces air up this tiny little tube and equalizes the pressure on both sides. Okay, so a useful little trick, and that's called the Eustachian tube. Again, nothing really to do with hearing, but again, you might notice that when you have a cold and this tube gets blocked, your hearing might not be so good. So again, this is essentially exactly the same diagram, all labeled up for you here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, firstly, in assignments, there is a sheet which you can print off, which is a labeled ear diagram. I'd like to make sure you label that up all correctly, please. Then there are a couple of short documentaries in YouTube. The links are again in assignments. I'd like to make sure you've had a look at those. And then your final task is, I would like you to draw a storyboard showing how we are actually able to hear. So basically, the process of how the sound moves through the structures of the ear in order to create sound. So you could do it from the perspective of the first person. So you could be like a bit childish perhaps, but Sammy the sound wave moving through the outer ear, the ear canal. What happens when you hit the eardrum? What's the eardrum like? What happens to it? And then here and here and so on and so forth. So I'll prepare a little blank comic strip for you. If you don't want to use it, you can copy or do one straight into your book, that's fine. I'll do the first diagram with a brief explanation, and then you can complete that as you go. You'll probably need to do a little bit of research to identify what the eardrum and the ossicles and the cochlea are actually like, okay, and use that in your explanation. Okay, so good luck, and once again, I will be online as always if you need me.